Thank you for joining us at watchthechurch.com. My name is Emily, and before we begin today's message, we want to tell you guys about our live gatherings. We meet every Sunday at 9 a.m., 11 a.m., and 1 p.m. at 120 South Locust Street in downtown Visalia. If you're in the area, we would love to see you here at the church. Now here's Pastor Kevin with today's message.
Well, here's a question today. Why Christmas? Why Christmas? I mean, for real. Why Christmas? Why celebrate Christmas? So there was many years in many societies, but there was many years where Christmas kind of fell by the wayside and wasn't celebrated all that much as a culture and in cultures. Why do we celebrate Christmas? Why should we celebrate Christmas? Why give gifts? Why receive gifts? Why sit at the table and not just eat but feast? I mean feast with family and loved ones. Why Christmas? To answer that question, we need to go way back in time to a very, very dark place in time. Joseph was dead, and for those of you who don't know Joseph his story was written in the Old Testament, and Joseph was the 11th son of a man by the name of Jacob, who God had changed his name to Israel, and Joseph was the 11th of 12 sons of Israel. And God had used Joseph in a series of, quite honestly, unfortunate events. God had used these unfortunate events in Joseph's life to remove him from his family and take him to Egypt, and not only take him to Egypt, but raise him to number 2 in all of the land, to where he was basically acting as vice president of the entire nation, the most powerful nation of the world. And God used Joseph to bring his family, the other brothers and their wives and their children and their children's children, a very large family. God used Joseph to bring the Hebrew family from famine to Egypt and to live safely. And whenever they arrived, because of Joseph's place in the community, because of Joseph's platform that God had given him, the Hebrew people were held at extremely high esteem. They were given certain pieces of property, and they were taken care of and given the best jobs because they were all related to Joseph. But unfortunately for them, eventually Joseph died. And as Joseph died, so did the influence and the legacy that he left. And once the Pharaoh that knew Joseph died, once he had passed away, a new Pharaoh came to power that did not know Joseph and did not care for Joseph and did not want or even to know or understand Joseph's legacy. And out of fear, because there were so many now, generations and generations and generations of Hebrew people in Egypt, outsiders, because of fear, he placed these Jewish people, these Hebrews, into slavery. And he removed their freedom, and he placed them in chains. And the Egyptian people began to oppress them, and they began to bind them, and they were allowed to work. Yes, they were allowed to live in homes. They worked, they lived in homes, they got married, they had children, and they worked, and they lived in homes, and they got married, and they had children, and they worked, and they lived in homes, and they got married, and they had children. But all the while, at the end of the workday, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, they had absolutely nothing to show for all their toil. They were slaves. Many of them were beaten, many of them were killed, and they had to live by the rule of the Egyptian slave masters. And this was all that they knew. This was all that they knew, was work, sleep, work, sleep, work, sleep. That's it. And years went by, and decades went by, and 100 years, and 200 years, and 300 years, and eventually we're into 400 years of nothing but working, toiling, being beaten, being told what to do, having nothing to show for it. 400 years, generation upon generation upon generation, lived and died with no hope of ever being free. This is all that they knew. This is all that they would ever know. But one day, there was a light. There was a light that shined in the desert. God, in His presence, He inhabited this bush in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of far removed from His people. In the middle of a desert of Midian, God's presence shows up, and God puts a light inside of a bush that's among the brush, and He calls out to a man named Moses. And God speaks to Moses and says, Moses, I have heard the cries of my people. I have seen the darkness that they've lived in. I've seen the oppression of their taskmasters, and I want them to be free, so I am sending you. Now go. And Moses leaves Midian, and he goes back to Egypt, and he frees now several 100,000 Hebrew people from slavery. And as the Hebrew people, as they pack up their belongings, and as they leave the slavery, and they're heading now to the promised land, following their Moses, everything changed. Or did it? Because as the Hebrews followed their Moses into the desert, heading toward the promised land, unfortunately, they began to disobey the very God that has saved them from slavery. The very God who saw their oppression, the very God who put the light in the desert, the very God who sent Moses to deliver them, the very God who had a place for them to go. They knew what God wanted them to do, but they continually talked against Him. They continually disobeyed Him. And as they began to wonder and wander in their heart, they also begin to wonder and wander more and more in the desert. And they continued to go into the desert. And then finally, after years and years of wandering around endlessly, living in disobedience with God, and they finally crossed the promised land. And as they come into the promised land, this is a land that God had promised to them, a land that God said it's not only flowing with milk and honey, but if you come, in Deuteronomy he writes, if you come into this land and you do what I tell you to do, and you live as I say to live, as you live the way life is supposed to be lived, as you as my people and me as your God, I will lift you high above all the nations of the earth, and blessings will overtake you, make you shine as an example. Life is supposed to be lived to all of the nations of the earth. But they didn't obey. And they knew what God wanted, but yet they weren't free in their heart to actually obey Him. So they knew what God wanted, but they would do something else. They knew what God wanted, and they would do something else. And then the Israelite people, they begin to obey God's laws by offering religious sacrifices. And they did all of the right things. They made a sacrifice, they went to the temple, they offered the sacrifice, they said they were sorry, and they did all the religious rituals, they did all of the outward things, but their heart remained far from God. And they now, like their ancestors in Egypt, they were held captive. They were held captive not by the wicked Egyptians. They were held captive by the desires of their heart. And even though they were trying to do the right thing, their heart kept being held in chains. And eventually, because they disobeyed, eventually not only was their heart held in captivity, but eventually the surrounding nations around them, they came against God's people, and many of them, their cities were plundered and their villages were burned, and many people got taken out into exile. And as God begins to see this happening, He speaks through His prophets, lets them know this isn't how life is supposed to be lived. There's something better coming. We're not supposed to live life where I am here and you are there and you are free, but you're not free here. You're not supposed to live life to where you don't have to live life to where you do all these rituals to try and be good, but your heart remains very cold, calloused, and in chains. There's a new day that's going to dawn. And the prophet Micah God speaks through Micah in Micah chapter 5, verse 2, and he says, "But you, O Bethlehem, who are too little among all of the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be the ruler of Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from the Ancient of Days." And then through the prophet Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2, it says, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light, and those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, on them the light has shone. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and he shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. Of the increase of this government and of the peace there shall be no end, and of the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish and uphold it with justice, with righteousness, from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this." Messiah, God said, would one day come. But a day went by and he didn't come. A year went by, no Messiah. A decade, no Messiah. And the people of Israel, they began to continue to work, eat, sleep, make sacrifices, work, eat, sleep, make sacrifices, and eventually their heart, because it was hard towards God, they began to no longer sacrifice to the God of Israel, but they began to put out of their heart and out of the culture around them, they began to put up other idols. And they would take the idols of culture and things that other people loved, and they forsook God, and they took the idols of culture and they put those idols and they worshiped those idols in their home. They put them in sacred places in their house. They put them up on pedestals and on their mantelpiece, and they would bow to this idol and they would worship this idol. And they worked and they worshiped and they tried and they worked and they worshiped and they tried, and nothing changed. In fact, their heart began to come farther away from God. And God, through his prophets, began again and again and again say, "The Messiah shall come. A light shall dawn in the darkness. The Messiah shall come. I shall be among you. I will tabernacle among you and set you free." And he kept talking about how one day the light will shine and the Messiah will come. But he didn't. In fact, after the prophet Malachi had penned his last words of his book, and he put his pen away, God went silent. And for 400 years, he did not speak to mankind. For 400 years, it was as if a blanket of darkness covered the earth. And it was during this time that the Persians came and they attacked Judea, and they took the people of Israel out of their homes and out of Jerusalem, and they took them into captivity. And it was after the Persians had been in leadership and had had their empire for many years, Alexander the Great, during this 400 years of darkness, this 400 years of silence from God, Alexander the Great in Macedonia, he rises up to power and he equips his army and he begins to sweep his dark reign all the way through the Mediterranean into almost India. And it was after his reign was coming to an end that the Greeks then attack Judea. Once again, just as they were in Egypt, God's people were under the blanket of oppression. And the Persians oppressed them. Then the Greeks oppressed them. And then after the Greeks, in the middle of the Greeks, as they were oppressing them and ruling over them, the Roman Empire rises up through Italy and begins to sweep through the Mediterranean, and it takes over all of Judea, and it wraps its dark hand across it, and it rules Judea with an iron fist. And nothing changed. Day after day, year after year, work, oppressed, idol worship, work, oppressed, sacrifice to God, nothing changed. This is all that they knew. This is all that they would ever know. And then one night, in a desert town of Bethlehem, God shined a bright light. And in a little tiny hamlet, far removed from society, a forgotten community, just as the prophet Micah had foretold, God shined his star above a city. And under that star, he wrapped himself in human flesh, and God came among his people. Emmanuel. God is now with us. So why Christmas? Why celebrate? Why give gifts? Why receive gifts? Why stop what we're doing and sit down at the table and feast on food and feast on love and feast on memories? Why Christmas? Because we, you, me, us, all of human history, you and I, and the journey that we are in, we are the Hebrew slaves in the story. We are the children of Israel in the promised land. This is us. Their story is our story. Our story is their story. And we, like them, why Christmas? Is because we are slaves. We're not slaves. We're not slaves to taskmasters that we work for labor. We're not slaves in that manner, but we very much, each and every one of us, we are slaves, and we are oppressed by the person that we see in the mirror every single day. We're slaves to ourselves, and we're slaves to our desire. And what we say, we have to say. What we want to do, we have to do. We do this and we do that, and we go here and we spend this and that, and we charge this and we impress them, and we're upset with them, and we do this, all at the beckoning call of the master of ourself. And we, like the Hebrews' children, we are slaves. We are oppressed. Why Christmas? Because we, like the children of Israel, when they come into the promised land, we know what God wants. We try our best. There's something inside of us, even though we have to serve ourselves, there's something inside of us that says, this is what is right and this is what is wrong, and so you should strive to do right. And we try our best to do what is right and to draw a line in the sand and say, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. But invariably, we do it again. And then we do it again, and then we do it again, and so we come to some form of, as humans, we come to some form of a ritual to where we try our best to off-balance the bad karma. That if I did this much wrong, then I have to do this much right. And so we try and do good works, and we try and help the poor and help the needy and be good. And we say we're sorry to God, and we go to a temple or we come to the church, and we do all of the outward things of trying to change. But yet, like our ancestors, we've done all of the things, but our heart is very far from God. And all of the striving to obey the law, it never changes this. Why Christmas? Because we are so prone to be idol factories. We as individual people, even though we have so much well-intention in our heart, it is so easy for us to take something that is a good thing, that is a gift thing, and make it a god. And we take our spouse and we put them in our heart as an idol. We take our children and we lift them up from a gift to a god in our life. And we take our career, or we take our hobby, we take our sports team, we take our thing and we place it deep inside of our heart, and we worship it with our time, and we worship it with our talent, and we worship it with our treasures. Much like our ancestors of Israel, we are so prone to produce idols in our life. Why Christmas? Because some of you, some of us, It is as if a blanket has been pulled over our life. And God is quiet. And it's been years since you sensed him. It's been months since you felt something that you have been longing for. Hope. And it's as if God has just pulled back and he's not talking now. And this is all that you know. This is all that we know, is to serve ourselves, to say we're sorry but not be changed, to worship something of our heart that is so valuable to us, and to have times in our life where it is so dark, so deep, so depressed that we can't ever change. This is all it's ever going to be. And that's why we celebrate Christmas. Because it's not all that it's ever going to be. Because God is among us. Emmanuel, God is with us. He stepped off of his throne. He has heard the cry of his people Israel, and he has sent a greater than Moses into our lives. He sent himself in the form of his son, Jesus Christ. And God, Emmanuel, he tabernacled among us, and he has shined a bright light into this world, and he wants to shine a bright light into us, so bright that it is as if Moses is coming into our heart, and he's saying, let my people go. You're not going to listen to yourself anymore. You're not going to obey your flesh. You're not going to do this. You are now free because the Son is here. And who the Son has set free is free indeed. And it is through the birth and the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus Christ that we, like the children of Israel of old, we can pack our bags and we can walk out of ourself as if we are walking out of Egypt. That's why Christmas. Because God is with us. Emmanuel, God is with us. We have been set free from idol worship. We have set free from trying to sacrifice and trying to work and trying to justify and to do good works to offset our bad days, because we know inside of our heart, my God, I can't. I'm always making mistakes. That's why Christmas. God knew that you and I as people, we would never be able to change. We would never be able to stop. We would never be free. So he sent his son Jesus to this earth to take the punishment of our sin so that now we can be free, not because we've done good deeds, but because Jesus has already done them. That's why Christmas. Why Christmas? Because your world was never meant to be this dark. I'm going to say it to you again. Your world was never meant to be this dark. And God has shined a bright light. And he wants to shine it not there. He wants to shine it in you. That's why we celebrate. We don't give gifts to give gifts. We give gifts because God has given his gift to us. We don't celebrate just to celebrate. We celebrate because we're free. We don't sit around the table and feast just because we really like carbohydrates. That's partly why. But we don't do that just for that. We do it to celebrate because the darkness has now shown. There's been a light that has been shown in the darkness. And we have seen it. That's why we celebrate. That's why Christmas. And today, I don't know where you are. I don't know all that's going on in your life. But I want to let you know, if you feel like you're in Egypt and you are so oppressed and you can't break free from even yourself, Emmanuel, God is with you. If you're here today and your world is so dark, and you've tried and you've said you're sorry and you've gone to church and you've done all of the religious things you can do to try and break free from the guilt, there's hope. And it's not in trying yet again. It's Emmanuel. God is with us. You don't have to live this way. That's why Christmas. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you and we praise you in Jesus' name. And God, we thank you for Jesus, who came to this earth, put on human flesh, died a brutal death for us, people who are oppressed, people who are prone to idol worship, people who are prone to disobey the loving God who shows us how to live life, people who are prone to slip into darkness. And God, there are some that the world seems so dark, and we wonder where you are and where is your voice. It's here. You've already spoken. The baby has come. He died on the cross. He rose from the dead. So God, speak into our life. Shine into our darkness. Because this is the hope of Christmas.